mics. I know we turned them on there to contribute, which was terrific, but if you could mute them again, that would be great. And Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Hello, and thank you for letting me present. This has been really fascinating, and I love the way that these sessions have lined up because mine follow pretty directly after the last two. So I'm going to be talking about an assessment strategy that I've developed over the past 10 years of teaching online non-majors biology. And so while this is kind of focused on what I do in my class, I think it is much more broadly applicable because, well, you'll see. This is my jobs. I teach at a small community college in Northern California, and so I wear many hats for that particular college, but I also do a fair bit of work at the state and a little bit at the global level as well. And why that's relevant is because the way that I've designed this really came about because each of those roles brought a different lens to my understanding of how to do assessment. So I'm the SLO coordinator, and that has a certain lens. The distance education coordinator brought a certain lens. And putting all of that information is how I came about, how this new design came about. The goal for me was to design an assessment that is authentic, and we've heard a lot about the importance of authentic assessments. An assessment that's accurate, and so it's really important to me to make sure that I can accurately identify what students know, and an assessment that is adaptable. Adaptability is something that has been very important for my particular community. Even before COVID, I think about 2 years before, we had a fire that took out a large swath of our community and shut the campus down for a month. And, and then of course COVID, and we've had all sorts of other things. And this assessment design is really flexible so that when those things happen, I can easily adapt the class to whatever the current situation is. And even with the AI coming on the scene, this has been really easy to adapt. So adaptability is kind of the key to this assessment strategy. There's two components to the strategy, and I'm going to talk about each of them separately. The first one is universal design for learning informed structure. And the second is metacognition using a learning journal. So let's start with the UDL piece of it. When I first started, so I'm going to take you back 10 years. I won't spend too much time on the history, but when I first started realizing I needed to do something different in my assessments is as I was using the traditional assessments, because we all, I think, start teaching using the assessments that were given to us, because that's what we know. I started noticing that the traditional assessments were really not a very good measure of student learning, and that they brought in a lot of confounding variables where I couldn't identify why a student was getting the score they were getting. There was just too many variables involved. For example, with tests, in addition to assessing what a student knows, we're also really assessing their test-taking skills and their speed of recall. The test-taking skill piece of it is particularly problematic because what I was noticing is students from higher socioeconomic areas went to high schools where they got those skills. Other students just didn't have the test-taking skills, and so I wasn't fairly assessing their biology knowledge. I was essentially assessing what high school they went to, and that's a problem. And anything essay-based also assesses writing, which again, is just a confounding variable. Not to say that these aren't important, but when I want to identify what a student knows, I needed something where I could directly assess what they know. Okay. So what's the alternative? The alternative is I give my students the option for how they demonstrate their knowledge. So I give them the learning outcome. I'm very clear with here is what you're showing me. And then I tell them, show it to me however you like. I'm going to give you some caveats to that in a minute. But that's the essential structure, is wide open. Here's what you're showing. You show me in the way that works best for how you think, how you process information. And students will come up with a really great variety of strategies. So a common one is, so this particular assessment is asking students to identify macromolecules and group them properly. This is pretty common in non-majors biology course. It's always chapter 3 in the textbook. So it's that assessment. But in essence, this is assessing, identify, and group. This particular student used an outline format where the larger group with a definition is at the top there, and then the smaller subgroups with their definitions. I should mention at this point, if you're reading these carefully, these are actual student answers, and so they're not necessarily correct. There are errors in here. And that's one of the great things about this is I can still find the error in understanding, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So this is one strategy. Other students create like tables, so that's how they process the information about how things are grouped. Notice this one doesn't have the definition, so the student would have to create a second something. So this shows the groupings. The student would have to create a second something describing the characteristics. And so students can separate these two tasks if that's the way that they process information. One of the ways that a student who is using a table to group the macromolecules might use to characterize them is flashcards. So there's online flashcards, there are handwritten flashcards, and this was always interesting to me. So I started teaching long time ago. So I've been teaching for I think 10, 12 years online. And even back then, where a student was signing up for an online class specifically to be online, a lot of students still like to handwrite their answers and turn in a photocopy of that. And that's fine for me. And then some students created these really gorgeous and intricate mind maps. So it really runs the whole gamut. And as Justin had said in his session, a lot of students will just write an essay. That's what they're used to, that's what they're comfortable with, and that's how they turn in the assignment, and that's fine too. But this has become really important for students who aren't comfortable in that modality. And one of the things that really excites me about this is I teach at a community college where a lot of our students are parents and work, and they have all these other obligations. And they find ways to wrap this into spending time with their family and kids. So I had a student for one of the bone modules where they're asked to identify bones, would put like little stickers on her son and take a picture of these are the bones. And it was adorable, and it was a time for her to spend with her kid while still completing class assignments. And now there's, a 5-year-old that knows a good number of bones, which I think is really cool. So that's the general idea of do whatever you like to demonstrate your knowledge. The benefits. I'm assessing the SLO directly. So there's no confounding variables at all. It's purely the SLO that I'm assessing. Students are focused on learning the content rather than the form, right? So asking a student to write an essay can be very stressful for some students. And so there's a fair bit of cognitive space that is used up dealing with the essay component, and that space that's not being used to deal with the biology component. I've had a lot of students respond expressing just how relieved they are that they don't have to do these things that stress them out, right? And stress is not a really great way to learn. And the last benefit is that this is actually easier to identify misconceptions than with our traditional assessments. Because if you think about something like a multiple choice test, the misconceptions that are options in the answers are the misconceptions we think students will have. With this more free-form strategy, I'm finding all sorts of misconceptions that I never thought would be an issue. And that I think is really, really important because it helps me understand where students are coming from, and because it helps me provide the student very directed feedback on the particular misconception that they have. And then the last benefit is this is within the framework of universal design for learning. And if you haven't seen the UDL framework, I just want to lay this out really quickly. I know this is, I just finished a whole 8-week course that CAST put on. So there's a lot to talk about here, but just in brief, UDL has 3 main components: giving students options in how they learn the information, which I also do in my class, but that's outside of the role of this presentation. So I'm just focusing on assessment here. So giving students options in how they learn the information, options in how they present their knowledge, that's what I'm talking about here, and options in how they engage with the information, which is all about letting students find the way that is most interesting to them, which this touches on, and other aspects of the course are more directly relevant to that. But again, not within the scope of this session. So the important thing that I want to point out with this slide, one of the concerns I often hear from faculty when I present this is questions about, is this reducing the rigor of an assignment by giving students options? And what I've found is I can actually increase the rigor because I am removing some of the brain power of stress. So I can reharness that into learning biology. So this has really allowed me to take non-major students up pretty high on Bloom's taxonomy, which is really exciting. And I'm not changing the content. They're not learning less. The difference is I'm giving choices in how they demonstrate their knowledge and choices in how they learn the content. So the analogy I have on the slide here is we're going to the same place. I'm not changing where they're going. I'm just letting them choose how they get there. Some considerations for this. If you just release students into the wild, show me whatever you want, that's going to be really overwhelming for them. So it's important to scaffold early assignments. The first couple of assignments I have very clear examples. You could do a table, you can do flashcards, here's what they look like. So clear scaffolding is really important for students that are not comfortable with the more free-flowing approach. Providing students a detailed rubric is really important so that they know what's expected, right? So they know exactly what to do. And the other benefit of the rubric, another concern that I've heard from faculty is how hard is this to grade? And with a well-designed rubric, it actually becomes quite easy to grade. And I would posit easier to grade than traditional assessments. I know for myself personally, if I'm grading a stack of essays, about 3 essays in, I'm bored and I need to do something else, right? That's the whole, our brain is wired for novelty. With this strategy, every assignment has just that little piece of novelty that keeps me engaged and really helps me stay on track for grading. So, but the rubric is essential for that. Okay, so that's part 1, the UDL. I see there's something in the chat. I'm just going to so great question about complaints from downstream instructors about students not knowing things like test taking skills and essay writing skills. I have not heard complaints. However, I think if you know that a student needs, so this is something I talk a lot with our nursing department about. If the skill that they need is how to take a test because they need to pass the boards, then yes, have that as part of an assessment. But separate that from the assessment where you're assessing their knowledge, because those are 2 different things that we're assessing. One of the things I do in my class is for a particularly complex topic, like the nervous system is really complicated for non-majors. Oh, and I forgot to mention earlier, I showed you an example of a lower level Bloom's approach. This works just as well for higher level Blooms. So for my nervous system, I give them terms. So here's a bunch of terms, explain how the nervous system works, go. And they can, again, do what they like. But then the next week, because I know it's difficult, and I know that learning the information again is a really good way to set that knowledge in their brain, move it from short-term to long-term memory. I have them do it again. And what you could do if you know you want them to have, say, essay writing skills, you could say in the second time, you must write an essay. And that way you give them that practice, but you're also separating out the two assessment components. Excellent. All right. So let's move on to learning journals. This is something that I recently added to my courses, and I'm still in the process of adapting exactly what this looks like. What this does is it asks, I used to, so let me go back again, a little bit of history. I used to ask students to just identify where they got information. And with the current rise of AI, I was finding that not to be an effective strategy anymore. So now what I'm doing is I'm asking students to explain their learning process. How did they go through the assignment? What resources did they use? Where did they run into issues? What resources did they use to help them with those issues? And so it's a really step-by-step, and it's part of every assignment. And it's required. I tell them, I just won't grade your assignment unless you do this. So the benefits to the learning journal. It teaches students metacognitive skills, and it shows them approaches on how to learn difficult concepts. So this is really quite a benefit to students because it's important for them to not just get to an answer, but be able to process how they got to the answer. It's a benefit to me because it allows me to understand how I can help each student. So not only does the broader approach of my assignments allow me to identify misconceptions better, this part of it allows me to figure out where they got those misconceptions from, because I can kind of backtrack to where they made their error. And that really helps me give them the feedback that they need. And it also helps with ongoing course improvement because I can see if a lot of students are making the same errors, then that's something I need to tighten up. Other benefits. So the first slide was the happy benefits, the benefits that I'm excited about. This slide is more about the benefits on how to prevent cheating, which is important, right? Because my assignments don't have large scale tests, right? So fewer high stakes assignments encourage more cheating. My class has more small stakes assignments. And so it becomes just less worth the effort to cheat. I did this thing a few years ago where I read something in, I don't know where I read it, but that it only costs $500 to have someone take an online engineering class for you. And that was because that engineering class had two major tests. And so it was pretty easy for whomever was doing that to just sit through those few hours and take the tests. I took my course through that same mill, right? So I pretended like I was a student, and this is the course. How much would it cost to have someone take this course for me? And it ended up being, I think, $1,500, so 3 times as much as the engineering course. And again, I'm teaching lower level biology, so topic-wise, a lot easier. But because the design has all of these small scale assignments, it takes more time. And so one of the goals I have is you make doing the class easier than cheating. Not by making the class easier, but by making cheating just cumbersome, right? This also helps me see similarities. If different students are all coming at the assignment in the same sort of way, because it's so fluid, if there's similarity, it's easier to see because there's more differences overall if you allow them to create the assignment in whatever way they prefer. Yeah, and Jonathan, as soon as I'm done, I'd love to hear about the fraud triangle. Yes, and Laura, that's what I'm saying. I hope I didn't say it backwards. So let me say that again to make sure I got it right. Fewer high stakes assignments encourage cheating. More low stakes assignments discourage cheating. And I have more low stakes assignment. Okay, cool. This also helps with AI concerns. And one of the things that I've added this year, again, this is an assignment strategy that's flexible and really easy to add to. So one of the things I added is the walk me through your process, and that has made it really fairly easy for me to identify when a student is using AI. Because if I have any doubts, I go through the links that they provided, and I can see if the links they provided have the same information as in their answer. And that way I'm not depending on AI detection, and I'm not accusing the student of cheating. I can have a conversation about the link you have isn't the same information you have. So help me bridge the gap. And if you ask them to link to the book or lecture, something very specific, that makes it even easier. This particular semester, I've added a new component, so we'll see how it goes, which is having students work with AI. And I'm calling this the fact check option for the assignment. They're asked to copy the answer from AI. So first they have to tell me, I'm doing the fact checking assignment. They copy the answer from AI verbatim, and then they need to find reliable sources to support or dispute the answer that AI is giving them. And the point here that one of the things that's really important for me is to teach students to critically think through information they find online. So verify it in other sources. And then I don't do this, but you could also, if you take this approach, ask them to remove content that isn't part of the class, because AI will often do just a mind dump of all the things, or to add specific examples from the class. So this is one way that you can use AI as part of the assignment design and still ensure that students are doing that critical thinking and their own learning. This last slide is just some links to useful components. So when you get the slides, you can click on those and take a look. Okay, time for questions. And there was one in the chat that I missed. Oh yeah, the fraud triangle is cheating occurs when it's easy to get away with, the stakes are high, and the cost is low. Yes, absolutely. So making cheating hard and just not worth it because it's a small assignment. Other questions?
Thanks, Suzanne.
And I'll stop sharing.
Very, and you answered about the class size, did you?
I didn't. So our class sizes are fairly small, and scaling this up can be challenging, right? So one of the benefits of multiple choice testing is I can run it through the Scantron and grade 1,000 in 2 minutes. So this is definitely more time intensive, but it also is not that much more time intensive, right? So if you're doing Scantrons, this is a lot more, but if you're doing anything where you're actively grading assignments, this is not considerably more time, just because of it comes down to the rubric. If you make your rubric clear, it's pretty easy to grade.
Great.
And as far as the feedback goes, I teach online, so it's in the LMS, and I provide feedback there. I can annotate. Yeah. Yes, and exactly right. So the course design is actually the first thing they get each week is the assignment. So it's very much backwards design, even for the student, right? So I give them the assignment and I say, this is what you're learning this week. And the next page has the places they can learn it. So it works really well because students are never reading the book just like it's, like it's a novel. They're always reading with an eye towards a particular concept that they're trying to identify. Okay. Thanks.
Very clear, thanks.